we have to be there to support each other, and people have to know that they have support, because I think a lot of people are afraid to speak out because they don't think that anybody will come to their defense.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Unsafe Space. I'm Carter Laren. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You can also support the show by going to unsafespace.com. Recently, Keri and I had the opportunity to sit down with Leonydus Johnson. Leonydus is a political and cultural commentator and host of the podcast Informed Dissent. He's also a speech-language pathologist, as well as a theater and film actor, writer, director, and composer. He's known for his common sense approach to a variety of hot-button topics, including race, gender, economics, politics, and the general role of government in our society. He encourages others to embrace the importance of individual liberty and to do their own research and challenge the narrative. So some good advice from him. You can follow Leonydus on Twitter at Leonydus Johnson. That's Leonydus Johnson, Johnsson. We'll put that Twitter handle below in the show notes, and his website, leonydusjohnson.com. You can also find Informed Dissent, his podcast, basically anywhere that you consume podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, all that kind of stuff. Leonydus, thank you for joining. Welcome to Unsafe Space.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it.
I was telling you before we started recording that you are one of our most requested guests. So everyone in the chat's going to be happy when this one comes out. So thank you so much for being so patient.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And it's just wild. So thank you to everybody who was requesting me. So I hope I live up to expectations. I don't think of myself as, some big figure or icon or anything. So it's wild that people wanted me to be on here. So I appreciate it. So thank you.
I know a lot of people know you from Twitter, but I really like your new podcast that you've been doing. I don't know if new is the right, is it still new?
Yeah, it's new. I mean, I started back in August. I'm in about 23 episodes in, so it's still new. Yeah. And, it's really just focused on pushing back against the narrative and taking hot button topics and twisting them and saying, okay, well, this is what we're being told. So what's the actual truth? Let's look underneath and find the actual truth. So it's been an interesting process, and still learning. So it's still pretty new, but it's been a good experience so far for sure.
Can you tell me a little bit about, this is I've asked this question of other guests before, but you in your bio it says you're libertarian. And this is, I always love to just get people's opinions on how do they define libertarianism, because it's still something that I can't wrap my head around completely. And since I left the social justice left, though, a lot of people told me you seem like a libertarian. Yeah. So how do you define that? What does that mean to you?
I think you're going to get a different answer based on which libertarian you're talking to. Every libertarian has their own idea of libertarianism. That's why we're always in.
And that's the definition of
that's the definition. Exactly. But I mean, it really all comes down to individual rights, right? You talk about property rights, individual rights, and the idea of liberty and freedom. And I mean, it's right in the name, liberty. Libertarianism is the idea that we have individual liberty and that everybody should be free, at least to me, everybody should be free to do what they deem to be best for themselves and their families, as long as they're not violating somebody else's individual liberty. So the line is drawn there that, as long as you're not violating somebody else's right to do what they want to do or what they deem to be best, then you should be free to do what you want to do. And that's really how I view individual liberty and libertarianism.
So why hasn't it taken off as a party?
Yeah, well, the party's kind of a mess. Like I said, everybody has their own vision of libertarianism, and you have your anarcho-capitalists, you have your anarchists, you have people that is that you?
I'm an ANCAP guy.
You're an ANCAP? Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, no hate. I'm more of a minarchist, but that's okay. But
we all start there, man.
Yeah, that's what people tell me. They say you start with minarchy and then you're eventually an anarchist.
Whenever I'll admit, Carter, I've never told you this, but every time you say the word minarchist, I think of a man that's half horse and half man.
half horse and half what?
Half man. Minotaur.
Half horse, half man is a minarchist?
No, it's a minotaur, but my head goes there.
The minotaur,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, all right.
I mean, it's practically the same, but yeah. Yeah, I mean, the party's just it seems so fractured and unfocused, and there's been some good things that have happened, but there's just been too much just foolishness and incohesiveness. So I wish that they would get their act together and really push onto the national stage, which we had a little bit of that with Gary Johnson. And he flubbed it, but because they nominate people like Gary Johnson, and that's the issue, right? Like we start to build momentum, and then something ridiculous happens, and people start laughing at the party again. So just as a political party, it just doesn't seem it hasn't seemed to work, and I'm not sure how to fix that other than try to figure out if everybody can get cohesive around a central idea and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're not going to have all this infighting. We're just going to focus on a national stage and really building up our reputation and getting some respect, which the Libertarian Party does not have at the moment.
It seemed to me like someone on the outside kind of looking in, it seemed to me like there was a missed opportunity for the party with this last election, because I did start looking at the Libertarian candidate, Joe Jorgensen, but then, there were a lot of people like myself who had left the social justice left, or maybe they were never in the social justice left, but they started to see the excesses of it and wanted to vote in a way other than Democrat or Republican. Yeah. And it seemed like there was a missed opportunity, because then when I looked into Joe Jorgensen, she was speaking woke, and I couldn't differentiate her from the Democratic Party.
Yeah, once she started coming out and talking about the Black Lives Matter stuff, I was completely done with her. And her big issue was she was trying to appeal to everybody at the same time. And yes. And it became such a problem for her. And she's whip smart. She's great person, very, very intelligent. On the issues, she was on point for the most part, but like her politics, like when just coming out and being a politician, like she couldn't do it. It was awful, and she just collapsed. So, and that's what I'm talking about. Like when we put these candidates out, and as libertarian candidates, which I say I'm not part of the Libertarian Party, but just as a libertarian, we put these candidates out there, and they just don't match up to the Republican and Democrat. And then we have the other issue, which the way our system is built, it's really difficult to get people to want to vote third party. And, people think, well, I'm throwing away my vote. I don't want to throw away my vote and then have the Democrat get into office. Or on the other side, I don't want to throw away my vote and have the Republican get into office. And that's a big issue. So you have this huge section of people, voters, who would want to vote third party, but feel like that they would be sacrificing their vote. So I've talked about that on social media a lot. Like, how do we fix that? How do we get to a point where people feel comfortable with the third choice voting?
Yeah.
And if we can figure that out, then I think maybe libertarianism, the Libertarian Party, could be a viable party, and that's including some of the other third parties as well.
I mean, do you think though is it that the Libertarian Party fails at execution? Or is that the ideas are not palatable in culture? Because I think one of the reasons the Libertarian Party is a joke is mainstream media will make it a joke. They will exaggerate any kind of infighting or ridiculousness because the ideas are inimical to kind of mainstream ideas. Whereas if the same ridiculousness happens in the Democrats or Republicans, they'll be vilified but not made into a joke.
Here's the problem. I think that we become a drug addict as far as government goes. Like we become so dependent on the government that people can't really imagine what it would be like if we teased ourselves apart from that. Is our entire lives revolve around these things. So like people will come up with different arguments when you say you're a libertarian. It's like, oh, well, who's going to build the roads? That's the favorite one, right? And so there's no ability to I see Keri.
Yeah, who is going to build the roads?
Listen,
we had that conversation early on in the podcast, and Carter had to school me.
Yeah, I saw you had Eric July on, and I don't know if you talked about that, but his favorite thing is to say "F them roads." So
talk about that.
but like I said, it's like we're so dependent on the government that in order to get to a point where we're not, it would require a detox. It would require completely teasing ourselves apart from it. And that's a painful process. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to go through the short-term pain for the long-term health, even though it's necessary for the long-term health. And so trying to convince people of that. So when you push libertarian ideas, like we need less government, we need to get government out of healthcare, we need to get the government out of schools. When you push these kind of ideas wholesale as the end, as the end goal, and without the build up and like the transition parts, then people have a hard time wrapping their heads around that. It's like, well, if we take the government out of healthcare, then what about my grandma who's on Medicaid and Medicare, whatever? What's going to happen to her? And that's hard to combat because it's true. Like there has to be some kind of transition out of that and transitioning the government away, and so that we can get into the private sector. So I think the Libertarian Party needs to do better at that. The big ideas are great, but we need to figure out the path to get to those big ideas, which will take some painful transitions, unfortunately.
Well, we didn't get to where we are through a massive step function from limited government to government overreach. It was a long, generations-long process of a little bit more government, a little bit more government, a little bit more government. And I think, if you're gonna focus on politics, that's kind of how you have to do the march towards libertarianism, which is, by the way, why I don't care about the difference between ANCAP and minarchist, because I feel like when we get to a minarchist government, then we can argue about whether we need it at all. But let's just march into a minarchist government together, because that's the direction that we clearly need to go.
Yeah.
But it takes a long time. This is a long, we haven't even stopped making the government bigger, let alone starting to make it smaller.
Right. Yeah. Spending keeps increasing. More government programs keep being added on in this administration. My gosh, like, who knows? Like it's going to take years. It's going to take years and years to undo the damage that this administration is doing. So yeah, it's an uphill battle for sure. But the other side of it is that it's from a principle focus, and you talk about the difference between minarchism and anarcho-capitalism. And I agree with you. I think that like everybody that believes in individual liberty needs to come together as a unit so that we can fight this thing, especially with the way that wokeism is pushing into our culture. Like everybody that believes in liberty at all needs to be coming together and saying, okay, yeah, we have differences, but look, we need to have common ground, and this is where we need to come together, and we need to push back against this thing. And so that those principles need to remain strong. But yeah, you're right. Like it's not an overnight thing. It's a stepwise process. And the way that we've gotten to this point has been very insidious. It's been almost flying under the radar. And, people don't, one of the things I always complain about is that people don't realize that the things that they complain about in politics and government came from a policy that they voted for, a year or so ago. They don't realize it. They don't make the connection. That's such a hard thing because it takes Californian, time. By the way, California, you're right. That was what I was going to say. Californians fleeing to Texas don't realize that they're fleeing their own policies. And
yeah, I'm in Texas, and we've talked about this a lot. As I talk to people here who are moving here from California, and they don't make that connection. They'll spend 20 minutes telling me why they left California and all the reasons it became unlivable. And then they'll say things like, we need more California and Texas, right? And I'm like, no.
What? What does that mean? What is not? And I get it. I mean, I understand it because it takes so long for these effects to happen sometimes. I mean, sometimes they're pretty quick. Like what was that legislation they passed in California that where freelancers couldn't work?
AB5.
AB5, yeah. So that was quick. that was pretty clear that AB5 was the result of that. But it's not always like that, and especially when you're talking about economic effects that take a couple years to really show up, and or at least for people to start to feel them. And then they're just like, oh, this is horrible. So we obviously need more government, because that's the answer to everything.
And California's wealth is also a little bit of a curse because it provides borrowed time. Like socialism is a leech that needs to suck on the blood of some sort of pseudo-capitalist system in order to survive. And the wealth that's been generated in Silicon Valley over the last 20, 30 years is tremendous. And so that offers a lot of blood to just be sucked and sucked and sucked. When if it wasn't for companies like Google and Facebook and Twitter and all these large companies that have created thousands and thousands of millionaires in the Bay Area alone, plus Hollywood, California would have been bankrupt a long time ago. They would have had to face their horrible economic policies a long time ago, but they can get away with it because they've got this gravy train going, which will eventually run out. But
yeah, right. But yeah, it does a great job at hiding the effects. And one of the things Thomas Sowell says is that he can't think of a worse way to make decisions than by putting them in the hands of people who pay no price for being wrong. And that's one of the biggest problems with just government in general, but definitely the government in California, because if they can keep getting away with it and they're not paying any price for it at all, then what's the incentivize them to stop doing it? So it's an issue for sure.
In fact, in a lot of bureaucratic situations, it's not only a no effect for being wrong, but sometimes it's a positive effect for getting it wrong, because if you're running a department, for example, and your job is to decrease homelessness, and homelessness goes up, you can ask for a bigger budget.
Right.
No one says you failed, you're out of here. Everyone says, oh, we need more of you.
Great. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well done.
Wow.
Gold star.
That's a great way of putting it. I mean, I think you can see that in other issues as well. It's like if you are running a nonprofit, or if you're on some kind of government board or agency that's supposed to address racism or sexism, it's like, oh, the latest polls show that racism is a bigger problem than ever. It's like, okay, well, then we need more people. That happens at the universities too. I mean, UT Austin has, last I looked, they have a diversity, inclusion, equity staff of over 100 people.
What are they doing? What is this job? So I said on Twitter, I want to go undercover, and I want to pretend to be one of these diversity and inclusion educators, and I want to get in on this gravy train. But here's the twist: when I get in there, I'm just going to start smashing CRT, critical race theory. I'm just going to tear it apart. But I mean, it's just like, what is their job? How is that your position to say, like, okay, well, I'm going to judge everybody based on the race. Here we go. This is fine. We're going to fight racism with racism. And like, whose life is being enriched in this process? And 100 and some, 180, is that what you said?
Over 100. You know what? It might be 180 now. Who knows? That was a couple years ago. It was over 100.
Over 100. Yeah, that's just, I mean, that's madness. I mean, one is too many, but over 100, that's
it's
absurd.
so expensive too. And then they want to say, well, why is the price of education going up?
Right.
Like, wow, well, you have all these bureaucrats. They're not even teachers. They're administrative staff. It's amazing.
The price of education is going down. It's the price of college that's going up.
Right.
I just want to be clear. Education is free. You can take classes from MIT online. I'm taking a class right now in nuclear physics.
Oh, yeah.
I had to buy the book. It's free. Done. I'm going to MIT. That's free. Education is cheap.
Yeah.
Indoctrination and universities are expensive.
Yeah. We're turning into the administrative state, right? And the cost of college, the cost of universities is really driven by that. It's really driven by like all these administrators that they bring on. And I mean, of course, the idea that the government can just throw out money and give everybody loans if they want to major in, whatever, basket weaving, I think is the common example.
Or diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion, if they want to major.
Yeah.
But, they're paying, or the government is paying, we're paying as taxpayers 20, 30, 40, $60,000 for them to major in something that's not going to be useful in their everyday life. Then it's jacking up the price of tuition. And then they're going to bring in more diversity and inclusion officers to to balance out the inequities, and the tuition continues to rise. And now we're in a vicious negative feedback loop, and it's fun times for everybody.
Hey,
Well,
I
the rest
wanted
of the
to
world
ask
is kind
you.
of making fun of us at this point.
Yeah.
They know
Yeah.
it, I think. Sorry, go
I
ahead.
I
missed
wanted to
that. You
ask
cut
you.
out
You
there.
so you are someone who has a reputation for being controversial on Twitter, and I actually don't find many of your posts controversial. It's just that the Overton window shifted to such a degree that what is considered acceptable dialogue and debate and acceptable opinions has moved. But
Yeah.
could you tell us what are some of the most what's maybe been the most controversial thing that you've said or that's gotten you the most flack?
Black people aren't oppressed, hands down. That statement, that the idea that Black people are not facing oppression in 2021, got me a huge amount of pushback, and mostly from Black people, but from a lot of white liberals as well. And the idea that, like you said, the Overton window has shifted. But I mean, like, people that are saying things that are even left leaning are being considered to be on the alt right now. So I mean, the idea that that saying something is controversial because the woke side of people are upset about it. I don't think that's very much of a feat. I think that's pretty easy to do because they're going to be offended by pretty much anything you say. But yeah, the idea that that race doesn't play a significant role in most people's life, as being Black in America, is something that not too many people are willing to accept. And that's probably my most controversial take. And we see it right now in culture with critical race theory and the whole George Floyd issue and everything that's been going on, that race for a lot of people is the central focus. It's the only thing they want to talk about. It's the only thing they care about. It's the way that they view the entire world, the lens they view it through. And it's their central identity. And so when I challenge that, it makes people really uncomfortable, and they don't like it because they feel like I'm challenging their identity, and because it's all wrapped up together. So yeah, that's always a fun one. Just that little simple idea that, like, hey, maybe you can do anything you want to that you can put your mind to, and maybe nothing's really holding you back except for yourself. That seems inspirational to me, but but not everybody likes to hear that. So
that used to be the message that we were encouraged to deliver, right? In the 80s and 90s, that was the, hey, we're getting close to post-racialism. We're not there, but the generally accepted viewpoint is nothing's holding you back, and everyone's got an equal opportunity, and they should all be treated equally. And, if you were actually overtly racist, I think most people would have shunned you or criticized you or ostracized you or said something. Like, you couldn't get away with too much overt racism. But part of me thinks that I want to say that Blacks aren't oppressed now, but I look at what the critical race theorists are doing, and I'm thinking, well, I don't know. They're kind of claiming that showing up on time and meritocracy and math are all white things. Right. That's kind of oppressive if you're not white. That's a pretty horrible thing. Maybe they are being oppressed, but it's by the left.
Yeah. Well, I say that they're oppressing themselves. That's the way I put it. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It is oppressive. I mean, when you're telling people that, especially kids, you're telling little kids that their skin color is a handicap, basically, and that the world is against them, and that it's going to be very difficult for them to succeed. Who's actually doing the oppressing here? Like, who's actually causing the issues? And yeah, I mean, like I said, it's just all in our society. It's in everybody wants to view everything through race. And I'm so adamant about pushing back on that because I don't think it's an issue. Now, a lot of people take that to mean that I say that racism doesn't exist. That's always the Jordan Peterson kind of exchange with what's her name. Oh, so you're saying racism doesn't exist? No, that's not what I'm saying. Of course, racism exists. Racism will always exist. There will always be people who hate other people for whatever reason, for skin color, hair color, eye color, height, weight, whatever. There's always going to be those people out there. We're never going to get rid of it. Such is life. But as a systemic issue, as an oppressive issue is providing a barrier to my life and keeping me from success, no, it's just not. It's not something that's actually happening. It's not real. So, and people don't like it. People don't like to hear it, but that's the way it is.
You know, one of the most recent one I heard to this point about critical race theory, in a way oppressing anyone who's not white by these ideas that if you're not white, you can't, math is racist and being on time is racist. The most recent one I heard was an article yesterday where it was talking about Oxford and how one of the professors at Oxford wants to decolonize the music department. And as part of that, there was a list of things they wanted to do, but they said that the music department is too Eurocentric, and that students of color should not be forced to learn piano, that they find learning piano to be extremely distressing. And that is so...
Wait, I'm sorry. Are some of the best jazz pianists ever black? I don't understand.
Yes.
What are they talking about?
Like you're playing Beethoven, you're just weeping. This is awful. I feel so oppressed right now.
Yeah.
And it reminds you of violence against black and brown bodies.
Right. They can't. I was like, so here's a short list. Stevie Wonder, Nina Simone, Ray Charles, Fats Domino, Little Richard, Keith Jarrett, Bud Powell, Errol Garner, Oscar Peterson. I mean, to say that if you're not white, you have great distress at having to learn piano. It's so insulting. It's so insidious. And I see white people who probably they're well-intentioned, I guess, but they spread these kind of articles.
Yeah.
And it's just such a, I don't know. I think it changes their mind. It changes the way they think, and they start to view anyone who's not white as inferior. Like you can't do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it definitely plants those seeds. It's very, very toxic in that way. And for a lot of white liberals, and I just hate I hate classifying people by race, but that's just, we have to do it for right now because that's the conversation. But for a lot of white liberals, it's become more of like a social credit, right? Like they don't really understand what's actually happening, but they're like, oh, this is what we're supposed to do in order to get social credit. And so I'm going to push this article on, why Beethoven is racist. And now I see, I'm not racist. And that's a huge problem because, the whole sheepish following lemmings, the lemmings, just the follow the leader kind of idea. And, people not really doing the research and really paying attention to what's actually being taught and what the implications are. It's an issue.
Yeah.
But it reminds me of the article about the hiking. Did you see that one?
Yes. Yes.
That hiking isn't diverse enough. And we're seeing it, and it's like music, literature, now apparently hiking, but all these things that are mostly innocuous are now considered to be racist. Like, why? It's so insidious the way this critical race theory is invading our society and turning everything into a racial issue. Like, I'm sure like us talking right now would be considered some form of oppression and white supremacy.
Sure.
Like in some,
we're on
matter.
top of the screen.
Yeah,
you're on
top.
the bottom of the screen.
Right.
So that's just to keep you down, man.
Right.
It's just to keep you down.
It's a microaggression.
Right. In order to decolonize this space, Carter agreed to let me speak 20% more of the time.
Right. Yeah.
But we could also extend that to you.
This is so inequitable. Yeah, we need to time it at the end to make sure it's equitable, because otherwise we need to bring in a diversity and inclusion officer and we need to talk. Okay. We need to have a training seminar. Oh my gosh.
You've talked about this before, about the the idea that it allows this ideology is a way for whites to kind of view themselves as parents and treat people of color. I hate that phrase, but people of color as children in some way.
Yeah.
And I sometimes hesitate to psychologize, but they psychologize us all the time. So I'm just going to ask you to psychologize a little bit. It seems to me that stepping into the role of a parent over someone who is not a child, but just because they have a different color skin, is a little bit racist. There's got to be a grain of racism. Like if someone said to me, "Hey, this other person is less than because of the color of their skin, and you should like step into some parental role for them," that feels icky and horrible. And like, who would do that? But maybe there is a lot of actually latent racism, and it's expressing itself in leftist ideology.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I wouldn't even say it's a little racist. I say it's a lot racist because you're elevating yourself above this other group of people solely based on skin color. And I've said that for a long time, that like when white liberals come and tell me this, like, oh, you don't think you're oppressed? Well, let me tell you how oppressed you are and how much better I am because my skin is white. It's like, oh, okay. So you have all this privilege that I don't have because your skin is white. So you're elevating yourself above me. You don't even know me. You don't know my story. You don't know what I've been through. You don't know, what privileges I have. You don't know where I grew up. You don't know anything about me, but you're making these judgments based solely on my skin color and thinking that you're somehow above me. and so like, that's the very definition of racism. So, and it's not necessarily malicious in that sense that when we think about racism as hating somebody else because of their different skin color, but it's just the simple viewing somebody else differently and making snap judgments about them based solely on their skin color. That's just as big as a problem as I'd almost prefer the person that says, I hate you because you're black, because
it's honest.
It's honest. And the other person is doing it under the guise of helping you. And you're right, to come back to the paternalistic thing, it definitely is infantilizing the way that they approach it. And like I said, elevating themselves above as like this parent, like, oh, I'm a white savior. I need to take care of you because you're just this poor little black man who can't do anything in society because you're so oppressed. And I feel sorry for you because you're not as good as me.
It's the benevolent tyrant that C.S. Lewis is about.
But that, right. Yeah. The and I don't remember the quote off the top of my head, but the whole idea that he would prefer the robber barons, right? And rather than the benevolent tyrants. And that's exactly what it is. I just posted on Twitter the other day that I had theater friends because I do acting. And my theater friends basically just turned on me once they found out that I rejected the racial victimhood narrative. And they said things like that. They said things like, oh, wow, like you're betraying your people. Yeah. Like, well, I'll fight for you even if you don't fight for yourself. And it's like, well, we've known each other for years, and now because you found out that I reject this particular viewpoint about myself that people are trying to project onto me, now all of a sudden it's a problem, and you have this entire different perception of who I am. And it's just, it's racist. It's racism. That's exactly what it is. And you're right. It's rebranding it under the guise of progressivism. And
it reminds me of what's happening in society at large right now. Because I just saw Justin Trudeau's tweets yesterday about how if you're flying back into Canada, you're going to have to take PCR tests before you board the plane, after you land. Then you're going to have to be sequestered at a hotel that you pay for yourself until they get the test results back. And then if you're negative, you can go home to quarantine at home. But if you're positive, they're going to send you to a government facility and that's not optional. And then he had the gall to say at the end, this is for your own protection. This is for your own good.
Those are the scariest words coming from the scariest words coming from the government. Don't worry, this is for your own good. Come on, Japanese Americans. We're going to go take you and put you in this camp for your own good, for your own protection. It's fine. It's like all these things throughout history. So yeah, I saw that as well from Trudeau, and yeah, I retweeted it, and I was I can't believe that people are going along with this.
Yeah.
And it's like they haven't read history at all. They have no concept of
or
what has happened throughout history.
Or seen an outbreak movie. Like, have you not even watched
history's
movies?
been hidden from them intentionally. Let's be clear. Like that, I think part of owning the educational institutions is precisely to avoid teaching the history that they don't want to be taught. Keri, you've talked about this. You didn't know anything about the failures of communism, but you knew a lot about the failures of fascism because they focused on that. But like communism is just, they whitewashed it.
Yeah.
And they're not gonna mention it. So I think it's an intentional thing. Something strikes me as weird. I want to run by you. I just thought of it as you were saying. You were describing your friend who was like, "I'm going to fight for you, even though you don't want to fight for yourself," right?
Yeah, right.
And it reminded me of, I got yelled at. This is probably 25 years ago. I got screamed at by a feminist for holding the door, because I held the door for her, and I thought, I wonder if that argument would have worked. Well, woman, I'm gonna fight for you, even if you have internalized your misogyny. I'm gonna fight for you because you're just a little woman and you need me to hold the door for you. I wonder if that would work. Any thoughts, Keri? You were a feminist.
No, that won't work.
That would not work at all. What I found with these ideologies is that they don't actually believe what they say, and everything that they do and everything they say is a power play. It's just a means of manipulation in order to gain power. And I talk about this a lot, that there's all kinds of contradictions within their ideology. One day they're saying something like, "Oh, Asian Americans are oppressed and under the foot of white supremacy." And then the next day they're saying, "Well, it's okay if we discriminate against Asian Americans in university applications because they're basically white people." It's like, wait a minute. These are not congruent thoughts. And that's only one example. I mean, there's example after example after example where they flip the script on their so-called deeply held beliefs. So it's really what's happening in the moment, and what they think will work to gain power and to manipulate other people in order to gain power. So
that is at the core of the social justice ideology, is power. And you can see it in the way they redefine words, like racism equals prejudice plus power, sexism equals prejudice plus power, and in the way that when this used to be not very common in the mainstream, but it's become more common in the past year since social justice went mainstream. When someone dies, they don't say rest in peace, they say rest in power. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I have seen that. Yeah. And
yeah, it's like, oh, you don't even get any break from social justice and death. You're still like, rest in power.
Well, they do, but now they're going to use your death as a means to gain power. That's what they're going to do. So they're going to exploit your death. But yeah, rest in power, speak truth to power. Yeah, everything's about power. So yeah, and if they feel like they can use it to gain power, then they're going to do it. If they feel like that whatever it is going to take away power, they're going to stop it, even if it goes against what they were saying yesterday. See AOC and concentration camps, for an example, on the border. Yeah. So, I mean, there's no consistency at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and they don't care. Pointing out that they're not consistent doesn't matter.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's the big thing. Yeah. You point out their hypocrisy and it doesn't matter. It's almost the point, right? It's almost like, I'm a hypocrite. I've actually heard people say that it's okay that they flipped like that because they're right, because they're morally correct. They've actually said, that's not just me just making that up.
Wow.
People have actually said that because we're morally right to do this. And like, that's the thought process. Like, it's okay that we switch and we flip things around and we have no consistent principles and we just, go with the wind based on our feelings because we're right. And if you argue with us, well, you're wrong. So there it is. End of discussion.
Can you tell us a little bit about?
Oh. Sorry, go ahead, Keri. Go ahead.
Well, if this is a follow-up, because I want to take it in a different direction. So you go ahead.
It's a little bit of a follow-up, yeah, because you've linked this to, you've said something that always sounds crazy when people say it, but is completely true, and I wonder if you can talk about it, which is, there is a Marxist agenda underneath this, and it's not about any kind of actual racial issue or anything else. It's about pushing a particular political ideology, and everything else is a tool for that.
Yeah. I mean, you think about what the end game is. So if you're asking yourself like, okay, where is this going and what is the actual end goal here? And if you realize that the ends justify the means to these people, and that by any means necessary, we've actually heard people say that before. I think it was Pelosi, right? Said that. But
it's
anyways,
the name of an organization in Berkeley called By Any Means Necessary.
By Any Means Necessary.
Yvette Filiarco was the famous Antifa type person who ran
it. Yeah. So, but I mean, that's the ideology, that the ends justify the means. So you're like, okay, well, then what is the end goal with all this stuff? And you can trace it straight to Marxism. I've actually compared it more to Maoism. It's more of a cultural revolution, right? Like a color revolution, and really tearing down the four olds and going after all the traditions and all the old ideologies and everything that existed before, and building up this new supposed utopia. And it's really similar to what we're seeing today. Although, like, you can almost draw parallels to just about every horrible ideology that's ever existed, like in history. And I said that the other day. It's like they just took all the history's terrible ideologies and said, okay, we're going to repeat everything and do it all at once. Here we go.
That's like that diagram. Have you seen that Venn diagram of 1984, Brave New World, Fahrenheit 451, and then it's like in the center, you are here. It's
you are here. It's everything. It's like, why? Like, we're bringing back racism and segregation. We're bringing back Maoism. We're bringing back Nazism. Like, what are we doing? Communism, everything. Like why is everything? But the ultimate goal, and the founders of Black Lives Matter, they said themselves that they're trained Marxists. They said it out loud. So the whole idea is collectivism. So the whole movement is based on a collective ideology. And so even if they're not going to say Marx out loud or Mao out loud, like, this is what we're heading toward. And you can make the comparisons, you can look at it, and you can see the parallels.
Have you
I think
noticed?
One thing that's important about your analogy to Mao, though, is Maoism. One thing that strikes me about the Chinese Cultural Revolution is they played this game in which no one actually knew what was going to be wrongthink and what wasn't going to be wrongthink. It was a game. It was a guessing game of what would Mao approve of and what would he disapprove of. And plenty of Mao's zealots were killed and lost power because they guessed wrong about what was Mao Zedong thought going to do in this situation. And he didn't want to tell anyone. He kept everything very close to his chest. And so what it does is it creates an environment in which you are hypersensitive about saying anything for anything outside of what's already been said, for fear of being like saying the wrong thing. But also you could get in trouble for not saying anything because you're not moving fast enough and guessing in the right direction that Mao wants to go. And I know there's no actual leader like Mao in the leftist movement right now, but there is that sense of, we're going to change the rules constantly on you. And it's just to see if you'll jump when we say how high. It's not really because we care about what the rules are necessarily. We want to see that you're paying attention to obeying.
Yeah.
And that's what matters the most.
That is a great point. It's really, it becomes about capitulation more than anything. And the guessing game, the rules are always changing. And, one of the things I think about is, I hate using 1984 references because they seem overdone at this point, but they're so appropriate. Like, it's hard not to use them. But there's also the Star Trek scene where in
Five
Picard,
Lights, that one.
Picard, yeah, the four or five lights, which was based on the scene with Winston, with the fingers. And it's the same thing. It's not about truth. It's about submissiveness. It's about humiliation. It's about making people capitulate, and even though they know it's a lie, they know it's not true, but making them say it anyway. I mean, that's complete power over that person, complete dominance. And that it really feels like that a lot in this culture. And like you said, I think there's a little bit of that with the keeping things always changing and shifting too. You never know. It's like, okay, well, what are the rules today? And am I allowed to, use these pronouns, or am I allowed to call you a woman? Like, what am I doing?
Right.
And it's always shifting, and it's about just being submissive to the moment and having, we're always going to have power over you, and you just need to submit to what we say. And it's always going to be fluctuating. So just accept it.
There's another, because if you feel that the 1984 is overused, I know you're a Christian, and yes. I'm a pretty new Christian, and I have a pretty cool preacher, and he gave this sermon recently, this history that I wasn't familiar with. Like Carter said, I went to a science and math school. I went to a really great state-funded boarding school, and then I went to a great university, but I didn't learn a lot about history. I didn't. And so anyway, I looked this up so I don't get it wrong. He was talking about how Nero blamed, have you heard about this? How he blamed this fire that happened. He falsely charged the Christians with guilt for this fire. And then he had all these public confessions and made the Christians, some of the Christians did capitulate and confess, and then still killed them.
Killed them afterwards. Yeah.
Still killed them afterwards. And he talked about this as part of a sermon about, at some point, how the only thing that will be required of us is just to have the courage to tell the truth, because it's much like that scene in Star Trek. And in 1984, there's this almost perverse pleasure that tyrants get out of having you say something that is not true. It's almost like some people have deluded themselves and will speak the untruths and they believe them, but it's almost as if they prefer those of us who know that it's a lie. They prefer us having to say it, because then it humiliates us. It takes away all sense of honor and dignity, because we know we're speaking lies. And there's that humiliation in that,
Right. It's complete submission. I mean, if you know something is false and you say that it's true just because somebody else tells you to say it, then it's complete submission to that person. So yeah, it's all about power, like we were saying earlier. And that really, like you said, you don't like to psychologize, but that's really what it is. This idea of making people submit to you and submit to your ideology, and doing that outwardly and publicly, like struggle sessions in Maoism, and whether they're guilty or not. And another example is the Inquisition, like going around when they went around and they rounded up supposed heretics, and people that were just accused and tortured them until they confessed. They basically forced confession, and a lot of those people were killed anyway. So same kind of deal, but it's about power. That's really what it is, about power. And then of course stoking fear, because nobody else wants to go through that. When they see you go through it, they're like, "Oh man, I'm not going to speak the truth now. Did you see what happened to that guy? No way." So it is definitely about exerting power and spreading fear so that people don't push back against you.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, I wanted to ask you about your history. Like, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into podcasting? What made you want to start speaking?
Man, it's been a crazy kind of journey, actually. So I used to be a Democrat, like a lot of people. Voted for Obama twice, 2008, 2012. And I
Same.
really did you? Oh yeah. So all right, we're in the same boat. So I walked away. But I didn't really I wasn't really political. I was pretty apolitical. Didn't really pay much attention to politics. Voted for Obama because of his charisma, and let's be honest, that's what it was. I thought he was a great speaker and he seemed like a good dude, so I voted for him.
Yeah.
And that was the extent of my political expertise.
He's like someone you would want to have some arugula with.
Exactly. Yeah.
Some arugula? Is that what you said?
Well, you don't remember that whole thing where they anyway.
But I didn't really start to pay attention to politics until Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson in 2016. 2013, sorry. But when that happened, I realized that the media was so dishonest about the things that were happening. And it really shocked me because I was like, wait a minute, like why are they telling us this when it's clear that this happened? And I started to really pay attention. And that's when really like Black Lives Matter started lifting up and doing the whole hands up, don't shoot thing. And I was like this doesn't, it's not adding up. Things aren't adding up. And so I started really doing my own research and really digging into things. And I realized that the media is not very honest and they're not very honest about a lot of things. And so that made me ask, like, what else are they being dishonest about? And I started looking into things, started researching and started looking at the Democratic Party. Trump comes along in 2016 and I see how they treat him. And, I start posting on social media, Facebook and Twitter, just putting my ideas out there, just, saying my thoughts and things that were bothering me, things that were bugging me, and ended up building up a following that way. It's really resonated with people. And people were sharing my stuff and people were commenting and asking for more content. And finally, after being pushed to start a podcast last year, I finally started one because people were more interested in hearing more of my thoughts in a longer form than a Facebook post. Because I had a bad habit of making these essays on Facebook that were just super, super long. And so yeah, I want to try out the podcast, and it's been going okay so far. I'm not much. I know I've been doing these interviews, but I'm not much of a talker. I'm more of a writer. I like to write, and my thoughts are better organized in writing than talking. But the podcast has been it's been okay. It's been going pretty well, and the response has been good. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
I think
that's
true.
Your podcast before you do them, because they sound very well thought out. Yes,
it's scripted for the most part. I riff thoughts from time to time. I say riff because I'm a musician. If you're playing and you kind of go off, but I riff my thoughts from time to time. But most of it's scripted, and that way I know exactly what I want to talk about, and I have my ideas laid out, and I'm not just rambling, which I have a tendency to do.
I was going to say, I think that's pretty common for some podcasters, not all. Like Carter always talks about how he much prefers to write. And we've interviewed Samuel Say. Do you know who he is? He's a Christian blogger.
I don't think so. No.
He has a great essay called Social Justice and the Bible, I think is the name of it. Something. Anyway, he's also said, he much prefers to write, but yeah. I think because there's a desire and a hunger for some of these ideas, like you said, people gravitated towards your post. Yeah. That people have been sort of, okay, well then let me just adapt and start doing it in this format that people want to ingest right now,
Yeah, and that's really what it was about. That just trying to get it out there in a different format that people want. Maybe people didn't want to read a 3-page essay, but they'll listen to a half-hour podcast. So just trying to get the truth out there any way possible. So I'll suck it up and deal with it if I have to.
Did you experience any fear when you started to post your opinions? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, anytime you put yourself out there, you're worried about how it's going to be received, right? Now, I found that I have a bit of a shield especially talking about racial issues, because I don't know if you noticed, but my skin's a little bit darker. So I know, surprise. I don't.
Oh, dude.
I don't know. It's weird.
I should
right?
change everything I've just said. I'm sorry. I didn't realize.
This is really awkward now. But
I was confused because you showed up on time. And...
Oh,
canceled. Okay, I'm gonna need the number and address to your employer. And
hey, man, you're looking at him.
You're looking. Oh man, that's funny. But yeah, I mean, like I said, anytime you put your ideas out there, dude, you're worried how they're going to be received, and whether you're on point or not. But the more that I did it, the less apprehensive I became more comfortable, just comfortable with my own ideas and my own thoughts and my search for truth. And I try to approach things like it's a search for truth, and not like this is exactly what it is and there's no debate here. I'm not always good with that. Sometimes I get frustrated and I put out posts like that. But for the most part, I try to be explorative with my post and question things like, is this really what's happening? Did the knee on the neck really kill George Floyd? What information are we missing? And like I said, challenging the narrative, pushing back on things, and having that sort of approach to things. And like I said, the more that I've done it, the more comfortable I've become doing it, even with the pushback. That's fine.
I like
it's
that
impressive that you're not in Twitter jail.
Yeah. I know, it's crazy. I have been in Twitter jail and Facebook jail before, but I'm surprised they've left me alone for the most part. That now I say that and I'm going to get banned. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right.
We're still, our Unsafe Space account on Twitter has been banned since January 11th. So we're still waiting to hear from the authorities.
What for?
Our appeal. They didn't give us an answer for about 2 months. They didn't tell us why. And then when they did tell us why, they said it was for, trying to evade a ban, which we haven't done. We never had multiple accounts or anything. But then we were kind of joking that maybe following the TOS is a way of evading a ban if you follow the rules. Hey, that person's
you get banned for not getting banned.
Are they following the rules? Get them out of here.
They're trying to avoid the ban by following the rules.
We know you don't want to follow the rules, and you're just doing it to avoid banning.
You're just doing it to avoid. It's egregious. How dare you?
Well, we're also, like we said earlier, we're also banned from YouTube at the moment. So
that's crazy. Yeah, and I've noticed it just doesn't seem to happen to those on the left. And yeah, I've tried to see if there's any prominent accounts that on the left that have been banned, even accidentally. What will happen? Twitter will come or YouTube will come and say, "Oh, we're sorry, it was an accident, it was a mistake." But it only goes one way. It's only one side that this is happening to. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, yeah, you want to throw out conspiracy theories, but yeah, it's just kind of interesting.
What do you think as a libertarian of the fact that, the major threat to, we'll say, liberty and individual rights is actually not coming from the government per se? I mean, part of it is coming from the government, but you have these large private companies doing a lot of the heavy lifting for what, if George Orwell were writing about today, knowing the technology that exists, he would probably imagine that the government was the one censoring people on Twitter, or, Big Brother was, Google was the Big Brother arm of the government, and it was the government doing this, but it's not. What do you think of that as a libertarian in terms of what we can do?
Yeah, well, it really comes down to cronyism, right? And we say that it's private companies, but it's not really, because you say, it's kind of the government. Yeah, it is. The government's all intertwined with this stuff. And, you have a private company like Twitter or Facebook, and you think on the surface as a libertarian that, they should be allowed to do what they want to do in theory. But if they have a monopoly on the market that's government induced, then that changes things. I mean, if the government's giving them money, if the government's subsidizing these things, or giving them tax breaks or whatever it might be, and in limiting marketplace competition, then we have more of an issue, because it is the government censoring speech by proxy, using these private companies to push forward a certain ideology. And we talked before about how it's a mistake to not have a organization making decisions that pays no price for being wrong. And that's similar to what's happening whenever a corporation is quote unquote too big to fail, right? If they're too big to fail, then they're going to do things. They know the government is going to come in and save them, or the government is going to help them achieve whatever goals they want to achieve. They're going to do things they wouldn't otherwise do in a competitive market. And so that's going to create all kinds of problems in a market economy. So it's not really a free market, and it's not really capitalism at work. So the solution, of course, is to get the government out. That's my solution for everything. Get the government out. Like, oh, there's a problem, get the government out. And then we'll see how it goes. Because if the government's not involved in this stuff, Facebook and Twitter is not going to be doing that stuff if they don't have a fallback. If there's 5 or 10 viable social media platforms that are, just as big, just as powerful, they're not going to be able to. But it really comes down to competition and choice, and that's really what the priority needs to be. So is there adequate competition in the market where people can make the choice between businesses? It's like, okay, you want to discriminate against me? You don't want to bake my cake? Then I'm going to go over here into this cake shop and buy a cake from them. And as long as that choice is available, then yes, private companies should be allowed to do what they want to do.
And this almost sounds like a tautology, but I think a lot of conservatives don't realize that increased government regulation is a decrease in the free market. And so the free market argument, if you've got Twitter and Facebook, who are, by the way, asking for heavy regulation, that heavy regulation, a high regulatory environment just means there are fewer players and they're bigger players, and it's more of an oligarchy. Yeah. And I think, you started, in one of your podcasts, you said a lot of the downfall of this started with Obama's election in many ways. Yeah. Culturally, the race war started there. And I think the other thing that started there was, I think, it became obvious to a lot of people that there's an oligarchical component to our system right now, in that you've got these highly regulated banks that were just bailed out. They're just bailed out. And socialism, they were able to use socialism for their losses,
for them,
but not for their profits.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, if you can imagine starting a business and knowing that you can stretch the boundaries, you can do certain things that you wouldn't do otherwise, because that you won't go out of business. That you have a fail-safe, so that you can take certain risks and do certain things that may be unsavory, because you have that fail-safe. If you don't have that fail-safe, then you wouldn't do those things. And so when you kind of zoom into and make it about yourself, and you think about running your own business and how it would be if you knew that your business couldn't fail, like what kind of things you might do if your business wouldn't fail, then it maybe makes more sense. But yeah, like you said, people don't understand, like, when in a regulatory environment, it makes it harder for people to start businesses, for people to maintain businesses. It makes it more expensive, and it inherently reduces competition. So if the free market relies on competition in order to thrive, then regulations inherently suppress the free market, and that's the reality of it. And yeah, people don't understand the connection between policy and outcomes, and they don't always make that connection. So
right, and so then they have the balls to blame the free market when the 2008 financial crisis hits.
It's like, oh yeah, look at capitalism. Like, listen, it's not capitalism. It's that meme where the guy sticks the stick in his front wheel of his bike, and he's like laying over, grabbing his knees, like, oh, capitalism. Oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have kind of a big picture question for you.
Oh man,
What?
big picture. All right.
Yeah. What do you think is the biggest existential threat that we're currently facing as a society in the States? And for anyone who's concerned about the trajectory that we're on, what is the antidote? Like, what can you do as an average person?
Uh yeah, that is a big picture question. Yeah, pointing out the problems is easy. Pointing out the problems is easy, I found. Pointing out the solutions, that's harder, especially for the average everyday person. The biggest existential threat I see right now is critical race theory. Um, and you could even zoom out and just look at the end goal and say collectivism, or even democratic socialism, or whatever they want to call it. But critical race theory as the spearhead right now is it infiltrating all aspects of our society and our institutions. It's really getting a foothold everywhere, and it's causing all kinds of issues and leaving destruction in its wake. That I see as the most significant present threat at the moment. Now, what people can do to push back on that, that's a little trickier, because we're in a position where there are real costs to pushing back against this stuff. And that's not lost on me. Like I said, my skin color gives me a little bit of a shield, so I can talk about this stuff a little bit freer than a lot of other people do. And I've actually had some of my friends come to me and say, "Man, I'm afraid to say anything because like the mob could come after me. I could lose my job. I could get attacked. My family could get attacked. All these different things, and those are legitimate fears. That's not just paranoia. It's really happening to people. I read about a guy that lost his job just for questioning whether George Floyd was murdered, whether whether the narrative was accurate. Like, he didn't even say that, like, it wasn't accurate. He just questioned it. He just said, like, I don't know, like, maybe it's not, like maybe we should look at it. I'm like, no, you're fired. So there are real world consequences to this stuff. But at the same time, if we see this stuff being pushed, particularly in education, then we have to go to the school board meetings, and we have to push back against it. There's strength in numbers. So the biggest thing I think we need to do is we have to be there to support each other, and people have to know that they have support, because I think a lot of people are afraid to speak out because they don't think that anybody will come to their defense. And that's happened before, where cancel culture comes after them, the mob comes after them, then nobody comes to save them. And so when other people see that, like I was talking about before with the spreading the fear, the people aren't going to want to speak out because they feel like there's no support. So we have to be more vocal, and we have to be a little bit braver. And unfortunately, we have to be willing to take the hits when they come. And that's just going to be part of the sacrifice that's going to have to be made to combat this stuff. Because I tell you, the critical race theory people are not holding anything back. They don't care. They're steamrolling everything. And so if nobody's going to stand up to them, then they're just going to take over everything. And it's already infiltrating like every aspect of our society. Thankfully, there are some organizations pushing back, so that you can get linked up with those. Like there's fairforall.org, I believe is the website. People like Christopher Rufo, I think Megyn Kelly is a part of it. Hersey Ali. There's a lot of different people that are involved with this organization that are really pushing back against the critical race theory stuff. And so if you're afraid to push back yourself and to be vocal yourself, at least link up with that organization and volunteer or donate or whatever. But we need to mobilize, and we need to be more organized and focused, because I honestly believe that critical race theory is the single greatest threat to our society at the moment.
Now, you have a degree in psychology, right?
Yeah, it's a bachelor's degree. Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm gonna ask you to solve a problem.
Okay.
So I've had it. No, not a personal problem. So
what you lay down on the couch? Where's my notebook?
Yeah.
Yes.
So my mom. No. What I'd like to ask is, if I look at just from the outside, I step back and I look at the left. They have been able to, for generations, maintain real energy and pressure, almost as if we're in. They almost always have this feeling that we're in constant crisis about some freaking thing or another. They're always mobilized. They're always pressuring, and it seems like I won't say the right, but I'll even say libertarian and right, the non-left portion of the population. It seems like they're just now waking up from this slumber that has been going on for generations, and they're like, "Hey, how'd we get here?" And my concern is, like, I think the answers lie in really, really long-term battles. This is not we're going to solve it in 5 years by yelling loudly. Right. And how do you maintain that energy psychologically for any length of time? I don't know how the left does it. I'm fascinated by it.
That's a great question. And I've talked about that before, where it seems like, the left are willing to, go out in the thousands and thousands into the streets and protest about just the smallest things. It doesn't even matter what it is. Like, they're out there
or a lie even. Yeah. It could be a lie and they'll go protest. It
doesn't matter. Yeah, they're out there burning stuff, looting stuff. They have. Whereas, in the right and libertarians, like, we'll get on Twitter and we'll complain about it. And that's the extent of it. But I wonder if it's not just the difference in personality, just the difference in the way that we view the world, where you have the collectivist mindset versus the individualist kind of mindset. And, as the individualist, we're kind of just like, I have my own responsibilities and I have my personal responsibilities, and, I'm not going to go out here and cause a bunch of trouble. Whereas the collectivist mindset is the ends justify the means, and we're going to go out here and we're going to do whatever it takes to reach our goal. So it may be a different way that people view the world that causes that. But I mean, it's a definite issue because, the right just doesn't do a great job at mobilizing and, just getting out and like you said, putting the pressure on things outside of social media. And we do a good job on Twitter, I think. But that outside of that, I wish if we had a stronger party too, a political party, our political party and the Republicans, they're just, I don't know. They're
like
pretty impotent,
thinking, though, on the right. There's some magical thinking from libertarians and Republicans about, well, I just want to leave people alone, so I'm just going to withdraw and leave people alone, and I'll be left alone. And it's almost as if they're not cognizant of the fact that you need community. You can't be an individual and fight a collective. You need a community. It can be a community of individuals. You can all be individualists and be in a community together, fighting together.
You sound like a minarchist.
You can't do it by your own. You can't withdraw. Sorry, say that again.
So you sound like a minarchist now.
No. A voluntary community can have. We don't need guys with guns to have. Guys with guns are nice, but we don't need a government.
But yeah, well, you're right though. The individualist kind of idea, it creates a kind of paradox where we're like, well, everybody should be individuals and should leave each other alone, and then the collectivists take advantage of that to infringe on everybody else's rights. So it's like,
because they believe no one should be left alone ever.
Right, exactly. So it's like, well, we'll give you the freedom to now oppress everybody else. So there you go. What was that quote where he said, whenever I am lower than you, I ask for freedom because that is according to your principles. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Whenever I'm below you, And let me make sure I get it right. Whenever I'm below you, I ask for freedom because that is according to your principles. Whenever I'm above you, I take your freedom because that is according to my principles. So is this idea is that you have this like power play, this power dynamic. So like I said, it's a paradox because like, well, we're going to give you freedom. We want liberty. We want all this individual liberty. And that gives you the liberty to now be a collectivist and to take away my liberty. So yeah, it's paradoxical. We need to figure out how to be a little bit collectivist and like you said, be on a more voluntary basis, but to be a little bit collectivist and to mobilize and to push back against this stuff. Otherwise, we are going to be steamrolled.
I'm wondering if it's a conflation of terms, because I would disagree with what you just said, which is that we need to be a little bit collectivist. I think they've duped us, maybe because they've owned universities since beginning of time. It seems like like collectivism and community are not the same thing, and individualism and narcissism aren't the same, or isolationism aren't the same thing, right? Individualism is a recognition that philosophically individual rights are primary, and there are no quote collective rights, right? And collectivism is this idea that philosophically the collective has rights and individual is merely a tool for use by the collective. But I think a lot of individualists have been convinced that individualism means you can't have community, you can't like gather together to do something as one big unit where you all agree and have a powerful community. They've even taken the word comrade and turned it into, well, that's a Marxist term, that's a collectivist term. You can't you can't call someone a comrade, you can't have camaraderie without being a collectivist. And I'm wondering, because you're not the only person that has said something to that effect, which I've pushed back on, which is this like, well, we need some collectivism. I don't think we need any collectivism. I think we need community, and we need an understanding that
as far as that's
we need the individualism, we need that freedom so that we can cooperate together. I don't want to live on a desert island. I do want to live in a group of people. I do want to live in a community. I want to cooperate with people. I want to do it voluntarily.
Yeah, I'll concede that point, and I will agree with you. And I think cooperation is probably a better term than collectivism. But yeah, then that's essentially what I meant when I said that, because it's this idea that even though we are individualists, there are situations where we do need group cooperation and we do need that community. And and that's really how I approach politics at large too, where this idea, and why I'm a minarchist, where I view the world as there's certain things that are better done as a community, as a group, through voluntary cooperation. And when you do things through voluntary cooperation, a lot of times a government is the best way to do that. And like national defense is a prime example, where it's very hard for, I think Milton Friedman made this point, where it's very hard for one person in Ohio to go to war against China, well, a person in Nebraska is not, and so to have that voluntary cooperation through government, very limited government, in order to do things that are better done as a group, then that's still an individualist and libertarian ideal. But yeah, I agree with you on the point, and I'll concede that on collectivism.
I'm not trying to make you concede the point.
I concede it. I'm done. I'm out.
I guess the only reason I'm bringing it up is I'm frustrated at us. I'm frustrated at the individualists, because we all seem to have this like isolationist mentality superimposed over individualism, and it's not. That's got failure written all over it, because just like a guy in Ohio can't wage war against China, a guy in Montana in a shack. Well, maybe Montana's a bad choice given where the Unabomber lived. A guy in Idaho in a shack can't wage war against the rest of society very effectively, right? Yeah. He can't wage war. He can't wage a culture war by himself. It takes an entire group of people. Right. And I've heard you say before, you need to have each other's back, and I feel like that message can't be repeated enough and more loudly enough.
Yeah, and like I said, it's strength in numbers. And if it's just one guy in Montana pushing back against critical race theory, it's obviously not going to be effective. But if we have a worldwide network of people that are speaking the truth and aren't afraid to stand up for things and have each other's back, then we're going to be far more effective. So yeah, I like the word cooperation. Let's go with that one.
Fair enough.
Leonydus, I wanted to we sometimes joke that I'm the optimistic one and Carter's the pessimistic one, although that's not true. You know how we become these caricatures of ourselves, and you know, I have pessimistic days too. However, I do usually try to end on a somewhat positive note, and because I have a lot of people, I'm sure you do too on your podcast, who it's why I asked that question earlier about what can the average person do, because we sometimes hear from people who are feeling disillusioned or looking for inspiration. So for anyone who's looking at the state of the world and feeling that sort of isolation or feeling despair, what are some things that give you hope? What are some things that you look to that inspire you? How do you have a positive outlook?
Yeah, I will say I've had plenty of days where I'm in that pessimistic mode where I'm like, man, like, I don't know what we're going to do here. I don't know where we're going to go from here. And it just seems like we're surrounded by insanity, you know, like, and that's hard to deal with sometimes. So I get that. I empathize with it. But I think just knowing that I'm speaking the truth. Like, I'm knowing that I'm connected to reality and I'm grounded in reality. Doesn't mean I'm always right. Doesn't mean I always have the right perspective, but to know that I'm working and seeking truth, and that I see other people around me doing the same, that gives me energy. That gives me life. And of course, you want to read and you want to watch videos from people who are like-minded, who are speaking the truth. Thomas Sowell is a great fallback. I like to go back to his books and read, and he really gives perspective and really helps you make sense of things, you know, like really helps you like wrap your head around what's happening. Shelby Still is another one. You'll read some of that stuff and you'll say like, oh man, like I didn't think of it that way. And it'll open up your eyes, and then all of a sudden you're rejuvenated and you're ready to go back to battle because you have new weapons. You have this new outlook, new perspective, or just shifted perspective, and you're ready to go fight another day. And that's you take it one day at a time. And you know, it's like we were saying at the beginning, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. We're not going to win this thing overnight. We're not going to take back the culture overnight, because it's been years and years and years of building to this point. So one of the analogies I love to use is building a wall. So you don't go out and you just have a wall. Like, you go out with a brick and you lay that brick as perfectly as you can. And the next day you go out with another brick, you lay that brick as perfectly as you can. And you keep doing that day after day after day, and eventually you have a wall. And that's how I like to approach it. And I like to think about it, that like each day is, we count the small victories and we keep fighting and keep pushing. And you keep reminding yourself that we're on the right side of truth here. So keep pushing.
We're actually on the right side of history, not them.
Yeah, right.
Great message.
Yeah,
not them. We're on the right side of history. But I mean, yeah.
So we're gonna do a little post. We're trying something new. If you guys are watching the episode and you've watched all the way to the end, we're gonna try something new where we're doing like a frivolity segment that's just for our subscribers. We're gonna be putting it up on locals, and so we're gonna switch over to that now. But before we leave, could you tell people, we'll have it in the show description too, but tell people where they can find you online if they want to contact you.
Yeah, you can find me on social media at Leonydus Johnson, Leonydus Johnson. And my podcast is called Informed Dissent, and you can find it on any major podcast platform: Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, it'll be on there. And then my website is leonydusjohnson.com. So definitely check that out. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate you.
Thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel, we have a deep content library that includes interviews with everyone from Mike Cernovich to Megan Murphy, so go check it out. If you'd like to see more, please consider supporting the show by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on all the major social media platforms, at least for now, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space chat on Telegram. See you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production has not been authorized by the Cathedral. Pay no attention to it. The following co-conspirators have been unpersoned and marked for cancellation. For your own safety, and to avoid further spread of contagion, if you have been in recent contact with any of these individuals, please report to your nearest Good Citizen Treatment Center immediately. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Remember, your uninformed opinion matters. We couldn't destroy everything and rebuild utopia without it. Computer voice Curtis, never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.